Can the earthly representative of God truly be a murderer, a deeply corrupt individual, or even a notorious libertine? Throughout history, the hallowed papal throne has not consistently been occupied by saints. There have been pontiffs who audaciously transformed the Vatican into a lavish palace of carnal pleasures, those who shamelessly commodified divine forgiveness, and others who clawed their way to power with blood on their hands. This is assuredly not the sanitized version of papal history you were taught in school. Today, we journey into the darkest annals of the Vatican to unearth the stories of the 8 most infamous popes in history. But before we delve into these revelations, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of our gripping dark stories from the past. And in the comments below, tell us which other notorious historical figures you'd like to explore next. Ready? Let's lift the sacred veil and confront the undeniable shame that has, at times, shadowed the Holy Throne. Number 1. Pope Boniface VIII, the tyrant who yearned to be more powerful than God himself. What truly transpires when the world's supreme spiritual authority falls into the grasp of a man consumed by an insatiable hunger for absolute control? As the 13th century drew to a close, the formidable figure of Benedetto XIX, a man distinguished by his legal acumen and diplomatic prowess, ascended from the shadows of the Vatican. Beneath his meticulously elegant robes and piercing rhetoric burned an unquenchable desire to subjugate not merely the Church, but also the reigning monarchs of the earth. Possessing a brilliant intellect coupled with ruthless ambition, Benedetto refused to merely await destiny's call. He forcibly seized it. After skillfully convincing, or more accurately, pressuring the humble Pope Celestine V into resignation, Benedetto swiftly assumed the mantle of Pope Boniface VIII. But his ambition knew no bounds. To decisively prevent any possibility of his predecessor's return, he had Celestine V imprisoned in a damp, solitary cell, effectively sealing his own ascent to the sacred throne behind unforgiving iron bars. Boniface VIII operated not as a spiritual shepherd, but as an emperor clad in papal vestments. In one of his most infamous papal bulls, Unam Sanctum, he audaciously declared that every human creature is fundamentally subject to the Pope for the salvation of their immortal soul. For him, the Vatican was not primarily the house of God, but unequivocally the seat of ultimate worldly power. He relentlessly clashed with kings, defied nobles, challenged bishops, wielded crusades as mere political instruments, and expanded his influence with the demeanor of someone who truly believed he owned the world. However, his monumental arrogance inevitably awakened a formidable adversary, King Philip IV of France. In the year 1303, soldiers dispatched by Philip stormed Anagni, the Pope's hometown, and brutally captured the pontiff. Boniface, though advanced in age, remained fiercely defiant, refusing to yield. The local populace managed to liberate him days later, but the irreparable damage had already been inflicted. Humiliated and profoundly wounded in both body and pride, he died shortly thereafter. This event marked the precipitous beginning of the end for medieval papal supremacy. Dante Alighieri, in his Divine Comedy, condemned Boniface to hell, accusing him unequivocally of simony and corruption. Pope Boniface VIII did not merely tarnish the image of the Holy Pontiff. His reign tragically ushered in an era of devastating schisms, bitter internal conflicts, and rival popes that would convulse the Church for centuries to come. And it all began with a throne ruthlessly seized in the name of unbridled ambition. Number 2. Pope Leo X, the banker of heaven who brazenly sold forgiveness. God has given us the papacy, let us enjoy it. That chilling phrase, reportedly uttered with a cynical smile by Giovanni di Lorenzo de' Medici, who would later become Pope Leo X, was certainly no jest. It was a stark declaration of his true intentions. Born into the extraordinarily powerful Medici family of Florence, Leo X was never a man genuinely guided by spiritual faith. He was, above all, a passionate patron of the arts, a connoisseur of luxury, and an ardent devotee of worldly pleasures. When he ascended to the papacy in 1513, he spectacularly transformed the Vatican into a magnificent Renaissance court where gold and indulgences flowed with the same reckless abandon as wine at a decadent banquet. But what truly defined his pontificate was his audacious practice of using salvation itself as currency. To finance the ambitious construction of the majestic St. Peter's Basilica, Leo X actively promoted the massive, institutionalized sale of indulgences, purported divine forgiveness exchanged directly for monetary payment. The message propagated was disturbingly clear. Heaven could indeed be bought, provided you knew precisely whom to pay. The corruption reached such breathtaking extremes that opportunistic priests promised eternal redemption even for sins not yet committed. And while Rome's grandeur was being painstakingly adorned with new marble and exquisite frescoes, the collective faith of the common people began to visibly fracture. It was then that a German monk, utterly outraged by the Vatican's scandalous excesses, boldly nailed 95 theses to the door of a church in Wittenberg. Martin Luther had just ignited the unforgiving flame of the Protestant Reformation. Leo X responded with dismissive threats, mocking ridicule, and a sweeping wave of excommunications, but it was already irrevocably too late. The profound damage had been done. His unrestrained extravagance, his palpable disregard for authentic spirituality, and his cynical perception of the papacy as little more than a family business opened a gaping wound that would irreversibly divide Europe and Christendom forever. As the seismic echoes of the schism reverberated across the continent, Leo X passed away peacefully in his opulent bed, surrounded by every luxury, yet leaving behind a devastating legacy of division, heresy, and a haunting question that would echo for centuries. Can a pope legitimately sell forgiveness in the name of God? Number 3. Pope Alexander VI, the undisputed master of Vatican corruption. Rome, 15th century. Its labyrinthine streets pulsed with intrigue, poison, and a relentless scramble for power. Yet, nothing quite compared to the depravity unfolding within the sacrosanct walls of the Vatican under the dominion of a name that would forever send shivers down the spine of church history. Rodrigo Borgia, the future Pope Alexander VI. From the very moment he cunningly ascended to the papal throne, his pontificate was brazenly characterized by manipulation, blatant favoritism, and utterly unrestrained excess. Alexander VI was not merely a pope. He was the undisputed patriarch of a deeply corrupt dynasty. He shamelessly elevated his illegitimate children, such as the notoriously infamous Cesare Borgia, to positions of power and shrewdly forged crucial political alliances by strategically using his lovers and relatives as mere pawns in his elaborate game. Under his debauched rule, the Vatican startlingly resembled a depraved secular court far more than a revered house of faith. Lavish parties, whispered secret orgies, mysterious and unexplained murders, and blatant bribes were all part of the routine. The supposedly sacred walls echoed with the hushed whispers of scandalous indiscretions and the screams silently stifled by betrayal. Lucrezia Borgia, his own daughter, was callously used as a diplomatic bargaining chip, married and remarried according to the fleeting political interests of the moment. But no one, it seemed, was truly safe within Alexander's intricate web of deceit. Those who dared to betray him or obstruct his path simply vanished without a trace. Meanwhile, the general populace began to swell with a potent mix of anger and profound skepticism. How, they wondered, could the representative of Christ on earth live like a corrupted, hedonistic Roman emperor? The end of Alexander VI was as shrouded in murkiness as his scandalous life. In 1503, after attending a banquet with his son Cesare, both fell gravely ill. Some speculate they were victims of their own poison, having mistakenly ingested a concoction intended to eliminate another cardinal. Alexander died days later, his body reportedly so grotesquely swollen and disfigured that his own servants recoiled from touching him. His enduring legacy was a church indelibly stained, a name that became synonymous with unbridled decadence, and a lineage that transformed the papacy into a deadly game of power and pleasure. Alexander VI was not just a corrupt pope. He was the very architect of infamy at the heart of the Vatican. Number 4. Pope John XII, the teenager who turned Rome into his personal brothel. He was a mere 16 years old when he was crowned pope. He had yet to grasp the concept of maturity, but he had an alarmingly precocious understanding of power and, crucially, how to thoroughly abuse it. Octavian of Tusculum, known to history as John XII, was not chosen for any semblance of holiness, but rather for the immense influence of his powerful family, who aimed to maintain control of the papacy as if it were nothing more than a feudal inheritance. What they astonishingly failed to foresee was that they were handing the sacred throne of Peter to a capricious young man who would ruthlessly exploit Rome as a personal playground for his darkest, most depraved desires. During his brief but utterly scandalous pontificate, John XII transformed the venerable Lateran Palace into a notorious house of pleasure. According to contemporary chroniclers, he organized rampant orgies involving courtesans and nobles alike, drank until he lost consciousness, and showed no hesitation in blessing sins in exchange for carnal favors. He even, according to these accounts, brazenly invoked pagan gods during his lavish feasts and toasted in the name of Bacchus, while centuries of Christian frescoes watched in silent judgment. But debauchery was merely one facet of his monstrous personality. He was also a cruel and vengeful tyrant. He ordered torture, mutilations, and even horrific murders within the very walls of the Vatican itself. His reign devolved into an absolute chaos of pervasive sin and gratuitous bloodshed. His reign of impunity eventually came to an abrupt end when Emperor Otto I, scandalized by the rampant rumors, summoned him to stand trial. John XII fled Rome, was subsequently deposed by a synod of bishops, and replaced. Yet he would not yield. He defiantly returned, seized power once more by force, only to die shortly after in circumstances as grotesquely fitting as his life. Reportedly beaten to death by the enraged husband of one of his many lovers, caught in the very act of adultery. John XII was more than just a corrupt pope. He was the living, breathing symbol of the utter degeneration of the papal throne. His story remains an open wound in history, a stark reminder of how far power can plummet when it tragically intertwines with the impunity of misguided youth. Number 5. Pope Stephen VI, the macabre judge of the corpse. It might sound like a chilling horror story or the twisted script of a Gothic series, but it is an historical truth that genuinely occurred. A reigning pope, driven by vengeful fury, dragged the already decaying body of his predecessor into a courtroom to put it on public trial. Such was the astonishing depth of Stephen VI's madness and depravity. At the close of the 9th century, Rome was a perilous minefield of political intrigue. Powerful noble families viciously fought to control the papacy as if it were a mere secular throne. In the midst of this turbulent chaos, Stephen VI rose to power, heavily backed by factions that harbored an intense hatred for his predecessor, Pope Formosus. Formosus had ruled with an unyielding firmness, but in doing so, he had also accumulated numerous formidable enemies. When he eventually died, it seemed his legacy would simply fade into the annals of time. However, Stephen VI harbored far more sinister plans. In a scene that would forever be etched in infamy, he ordered the exhumation of Formosus's corpse, which had been buried for months. He had it grotesquely dressed in papal robes to face an official, public trial in the solemn Basilica of St. John Lateran. The spectacle was nothing short of grotesque. The bloated, decomposing body, eerily supported by a trembling deacon who was forced to answer on its behalf, was formally accused of having usurped the throne and violated sacred ecclesiastical laws. The assembled audience was stunned into a horrified silence. Some wept openly, others nervously laughed. But the predetermined verdict was undeniably clear: guilty. As a horrific punishment, Stephen VI ordered that the 3 fingers with which Formosus had given blessings be brutally cut off, stripped him of his papal vestments, and had his corpse ignominiously thrown into the Tiber River. What Stephen did not anticipate was the furious public reaction. The trial of a corpse was simply too much, even for a Rome accustomed to excess. The people rose in a unified fury. The outrage was so immense that Stephen himself was imprisoned shortly afterward and, in a grim twist of fate, strangled in his cell. The story of Stephen VI left an indelible, chilling mark on the memory of Christianity, not for any teachings, but for having taken resentment and vengeance far beyond the grave. Number 6. Pope Benedict IX, the merchant of the papal soul. Few pontiffs in the entire sweep of history have pushed institutional corruption to such an absurd, almost farcical level as Benedict IX. His life was an astonishing parade of relentless scandals, brazenly purchased resignations, and utterly shameful returns to power. He famously served as pope not once, but 3 separate times, and casually sold the sacred office as if it were merely a cursed inheritance. Theophylact of Tusculum was born into one of the most overwhelmingly powerful families in Rome. He possessed no genuine vocation, no theological training whatsoever, and was barely of age. Yet, nepotism proved to be his golden ticket into the Vatican. At barely 20 years old, he was shockingly appointed pope through the direct, overwhelming influence of his family. From the very outset, his pontificate devolved into a tragicomic farce. He was widely accused of rampant orgies within the hallowed palace, of orchestrating murders to eliminate opponents, of heresy, simony, and even, disturbingly, of invoking dark forces. Rome spiraled into a vortex of chaos, while Benedict behaved far more like a decadent, profligate prince than a spiritual leader. But the most astonishing part of his tenure was yet to unfold. Either genuinely tired of his role or simply overwhelmed by the sheer scale of his scandals, he astonishingly sold the papacy in 1045 to his spiritual godfather, Archdeacon John Gratian, for an immense fortune. Thus, his buyer became Pope Gregory VI. However, like an actor stubbornly unwilling to exit the stage, Benedict defiantly returned months later to reclaim the throne. He regained it, only to lose it again, and then, in a truly unprecedented move, he returned for a 3rd time, as if the sacred office were merely a casino chip to be played. In the end, he was excommunicated and eventually faded into obscurity, leaving behind a Rome deeply fractured and scarred. Benedict IX did not merely stain the revered name of the Church. He shamelessly sold it and resold it, tarnishing its very soul. Number 7. Pope Urban VI, the fanatic who sowed chaos in the Vatican. When Bartolomeo Prignano was elected pope in 1378, assuming the name Urban VI, many initially believed he would usher in a new era of reform. He did not belong to any powerful noble family, nor did he owe favors to influential nobles or cardinals. But what no one could have suspected was that his outward display of apparent humility concealed an explosive temper and a profound paranoia that would inevitably transform the Vatican into a reign of unrelenting terror. From the very first days of his pontificate, Urban VI made it unequivocally clear that he would tolerate absolutely no opposition. He publicly shouted at cardinals, openly insulted ambassadors, and even physically slapped members of his own clergy. He vehemently demanded discipline, yet simultaneously ruled with an iron fist and without a shred of mercy or compassion. His escalating obsession with absolute control soon unleashed unprecedented chaos. The Roman clergy, profoundly alarmed by his tyrannical and erratic behavior, desperately attempted to reverse his election. 10 cardinals fled to Avignon and, in a move that would shake Christendom, elected another pope, Clement VII. Thus began the calamitous Western Schism, a protracted period during which 2, and later even 3, rival popes all claimed to be the legitimate successor of Peter. The entire Christian world was irrevocably divided. Kingdoms aligned themselves with different pontiffs, and papal authority fragmented like never before. But Urban's fury did not abate. Convinced that his enemies lurked everywhere, he ordered the arrest, torture, and brutal execution of several cardinals whom he suspected of treason. He ruled through sheer fear and sowed a profound distrust that would take decades to heal. Urban VI died in 1389, isolated and despised even by those who had once been his own supporters. His reign marked the grim beginning of a dark era in which the cherished unity of Christianity was shattered by the monumental ego and dangerous fanaticism of a single, unhinged man. Number 8. Pope Sergius III, the criminal who imposes rule with blood. There have been popes who were undeniably corrupt, others who were notorious libertines, and some who were dangerous fanatics. But Sergius III was, quite simply, a career criminal. His violent ascent to the papal throne was guided not by the Holy Spirit, but by the cold edge of a sword and the literal blood spilled in the very halls of the Vatican. The year was 904. Rome was engulfed in a profound state of moral and political decay. Powerful noble families treated the church like a mere battlefield for their own gain. Sergius III, a bishop from one of Italy's most turbulent regions, showed no hesitation in killing to carve his brutal path to power. His initial attempt to become pope failed, but years later, he returned with a formidable army. He violently seized the Vatican, ordered the imprisonment and almost certain elimination of his rivals, and then audaciously proclaimed himself supreme pontiff. Thus began a dark era known by historians as the pornocracy, a period in which Rome was astonishingly controlled by tangled alliances of blood, insatiable lust, and ruthless death. Sergius III not only ruled with an iron fist, but also became deeply entangled with the powerful Theodora and her equally formidable daughter Marozia. These were women who masterfully controlled Vatican politics from the shadowy corridors of power. According to contemporary chronicles, Marozia was his acknowledged lover and the mother of his illegitimate son, who would also, incredibly, become pope years later, John XI. The papacy, once a revered symbol of spirituality, was horrifyingly transformed into a dynastic lineage governed by rampant corruption and insidious betrayal. Sergius III died without a hint of remorse, having successfully imposed an era of terror. He was akin to a mob boss dressed in white, arguably the first to transform the papacy into a machinery of mafia-like power. Over more than 2,000 years, the papacy has largely endured as a powerful symbol of unwavering faith, spiritual guidance, and profound hope for millions across the globe. But at certain, regrettable moments, it has also been a throne shrouded in inescapable shadows, consumed by unbridled ambition, and stained by egregious sin. The cases we have explored here are not merely dark, isolated anecdotes. They stand as potent historical warnings about what inevitably transpires when absolute power ceases to answer to divine principles. These men, it is crucial to remember, do not represent the entirety of the Church, nor do they define the profound faith professed by millions. Yet, their stories must be meticulously told because even the most sacred institution in the world has not been entirely free from errors and indeed from monsters. And as long as history remains vibrantly alive, it will continue to remind us of an uncomfortable but ultimately necessary truth. Power without limits, even within the hallowed halls of the Church, can corrupt even what is seemingly eternal. Thank you for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this video and are passionate about this type of content, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our upcoming explorations of history's most intriguing figures and events.